Hello, my name is Anna Wingard, and I will be presenting the Unit 12 for the Economy 1.0. This unit explores when market leads to efficient outcomes and when they fail. Basically, we're learning about the conditions that make markets efficient, like when there's competition and everyone has the right information, and what happens when those conditions are not met. It also dives into why markets sometimes fail and what can be done about it. We talk about things like externalities, public goods, and monopolies. The unit covers how these problems might be fixed through bargaining between people or by the government stepping in with things like taxes or regulations. We're also looking at the limits of markets and when using them might not be the best idea. This includes more complicated situations where markets might lead to unfair outcomes, like in healthcare or education, or where using markets just doesn't feel right morally or socially. Externalities. Externalities happen when someone's actions impact other people, but those effects aren't included in the price of what they're doing. So basically, the person or company making the decision doesn't have to pay for all the consequences of their actions. The market kind of ignores the side effects. A classic example of a negative externality is pollution. Like when a factory dumps waste into a river, it might save money, but it harms people downstream who use the water. The factory isn't paying for the damage, so the true cost of production is hidden. On the flip side, positive externality would be something like education. When someone gets educated, it not only benefits them personally, but it also helps society through things like higher productivity, better civic engagement, and lower crime rates. But since those broader benefits don't show up in the market, the price, education can end up being underprovided. These kind of external effects mess with market efficiency because all the full social costs or benefits aren't reflected in prices. People end up making decisions that don't lead to the best overall outcomes for society. That's why economists say externalities cause market failure. Marginal private and external costs. Marginal private cost is the cost borne directly by the producer for producing one additional unit of a good or service. This includes expenses like labor, materials, and energy. MPC reflects only the producer's perspective and does not account for any costs imposed on others. Marginal external cost, or MEC, the cost imposed on third parties when one additional unit of a good or service is produced. These are not paid by the producer or consumer directly, and often include pollution, noise, or health impacts. MEC represents the hidden cost to society that is not captured in the marketplace. Marginal social costs. Marginal social costs means that the total cost to society of producing one or more unit of something includes both the cost to the producer, or MPC, and any costs that others have to deal with, or MEC, like pollution or noise. So MSC, marginal social cost, captures the full picture, not just what the business is paying. The problem is that producers usually only think about their own costs, not the external costs. Since they don't have to pay for things like environmental damage, they ignore it. That means that they might produce more than what's actually good for society. This leads to inefficiency because the market price ends up being too low and too much of the good gets produced. If everyone had to face the true social costs, we would probably see less of that good being made, and society as a whole would be better off. Banana plantations and pesticide use. Banana producers use this chemical called Weevil, which helps them grow bananas but ends up polluting the water and messing up the fishing industry. So while it's good for the banana company's profits, it's bad for the local fishermen who rely on clean water. The chemical causes an external cost that the producers don't have to pay for. Because producers only care about their own costs and profits, they end up making way more bananas than are actually good for society, like 80,000 tons. They're not factoring the harm to the fishermen or the environment, so the market ends up being flooded with bananas. No pun intended. But if we included those external costs, the right or socially optimal amount would be way less, around 38,000 tons, where the marginal social cost equals the marginal benefit to society. That's the point where producing one more ton of bananas adds just as much value as it costs society, including the environmental damage. This example really shows how ignoring external costs can cause market failure. When the market doesn't reflect the true cost of production, it leads to overproduction and harms people who aren't even part of the transaction, like the fishermen, for example. Bargaining solution to market failures. According to the Coase theorem, it's actually possible for people to work out efficient solutions to externality problems through private bargaining, as long as a couple things are in place. First, property rights have to be clearly defined. Basically, everyone needs to know who has the right to what. Second, transaction costs have to be really low, meaning it should be easy and cheap for the parties involved to make a deal. For example, let's say banana plantations are polluting a river that fishermen rely on. If the fishermen have the right to clean water, they could negotiate with the plantations, or maybe even pay them to reduce production or switch to a cleaner method. As long as it's cheaper to make the deal than to suffer the damage, both sides can benefit and the outcome is efficient. But the issue is, in real life, it's really that simple. There are usually a lot of people affected, not just one or two parties, which makes it hard to coordinate. Plus, transaction costs can be high, like time, legal fees, or even just the difficulty of getting everyone to agree. On top of that, actually enforcing the agreement can be a headache. So even though Coase's idea works in theory, in practice, bargaining often falls apart and the externality never gets solved. Government policies to correct market failure. One way to deal with the externalities is through taxes and subsidies, which are basically the tools the government can use to help fix market failures. A Pigouvian tax is a good example. It's a tax that's set to equal the marginal external cost of something, like pollution. So if a factory is causing $50 worth of damage to the environment for every ton of output, they'd get taxed $50 per ton. The idea is to make them internalize the costs they're putting on society, so they think twice before overproducing. On the flip side, the government can also give out subsidies for positive externalities, things that benefit more than just the person doing them. A good example is education. Since an educated population benefits everyone, not just the student, the government might pay part of the cost to encourage more people to go to school. There's also regulation, which is more direct. This could mean setting limits or emissions, or putting caps on how much companies can produce. It's kind of a top-down approach, just saying you can't do more than this. Then there are tradable permits, like in cap-and-trade systems. Here, the government sets a total cap on pollution and gives out or sells permits to pollute. Companies can then trade these permits, which creates a market for pollution. The goal that is companies who can rely on pollution cheaply will do so and sell their extra permits, while others buy them in a more cost effective than cutting emissions themselves. All these methods are about aligning private incentives with what's good for society, so businesses take into account the full cost and benefits of their actions, not just what affects them directly. Moral hazards. Moral hazards happen when someone takes more risks because they don't have to deal with the full consequences. A common example is with insurance. Like if a driver knows their car is fully covered, they might drive more recklessly because, in their mind, the insurance company is footing the bill if something goes wrong. The risk isn't really changing, but the person's behavior does, which can lead to more accidents and higher costs overall. Then there's adverse selection, which is all about one party knowing more than the other. A classic example is in health insurance. People who are already sick expect to need a lot of care and more likely to buy coverage, while healthier people might skip it. The insurance company can't always tell who's healthy and who's not, so they end up with a pool of mostly high-risk customers, which drives up prices. That just makes even more healthy people opt out, and the whole system kind of spirals. Both of these problems create market inefficiencies. Prices don't affect actual risk, and resources don't get allocated in the best way. That's why we often need regulation or other mechanisms like screening processes, deductibles, or government intervention to help fix things and make markets work better. Even though markets are great at organizing who gets what, they don't always lead to fair or ideal outcomes, especially when it comes to certain types of good or situations. Take public goods like national defense or clean air. These are called public goods because they're non excludable and non rival. The problem is, since no one can be excluded, people tend to free ride, basically benefiting without paying. Because of that, businesses don't have much incentive to provide these goods, and they end up being underprovided unless the government steps in. There are also merit goods, like education and healthcare. These are things that are really beneficial to individuals and society, but markets tend to underprovide them because not everyone can afford to pay what they're worth. If we relied on markets alone, a lot of people would miss out, even though everyone would be better off if access were more equal. That's why governments often subsidize or directly provide these services. Then there are repugnant markets, which are a whole different issue. These are markets where buying and selling something just feels morally wrong, like paying people for human organs or allowing child labor. Even if a market could technically function, society often agrees that some things shouldn't be for sale because they conflict with our values or human rights. All this shows that when markets can be efficient, they don't always produce outcomes that are fair or ethical, and sometimes they need help from governments, regulations, or alternative systems to fill in the gaps. To conclude, markets are really useful when it comes to organizing resources and making sure goods and services get to where they're needed. But the truth is, they don't always work perfectly. There are situations, like when externalities are involved or when one side has more information than the other, where markets can fail to produce fair or efficient outcomes. Sometimes there are even moral reasons why certain things shouldn't be left up to the market at all. That's where interventions come in. Depending on the issue, solutions might involve private bargaining, government regulations, or even having the government provide certain goods and services directly. What really matters is understanding when and why markets fail, because that's what helps us come up with smarter policies that improve outcomes for everyone. If we know the limitations of markets, we can figure out better ways to address the problems and build systems that work more fairly and effectively. I added a few questions that I had after doing this presentation, and three of my questions are: can bargaining really solve large-scale externalities? What's the right balance between markets and government? And how can we address fairness while maintaining efficiency? Thank you.